Hi, I'm Dan Kubisky, co-chair of the Society of Professional Journalists International Community. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador will leave office at the end of September. The new president will be Claudia Sheinbaum from López Obrador's Morena party. Now, AMLO, as the president is called, said last week that one of the three things he was proudest of during his 6-year term is that no journalists were killed. But he then quickly added, beyond what circumstances have caused. Well, it's pretty clear that many have been killed in the past 6 years for doing journalism. Article 19 puts the number at 47, Reporters Without Borders at 40, the Committee to Protect Journalists at 17. No matter the number, it's still greater than zero. To talk about this outrageous statement and the latest developments in Mexico is our friend Vicente Calderone, founder and editor of the online news service Tijuana Press. Vicente, thank you again very much for being with us today. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan.
So what is your reaction to AMLO's statement that no journalists were killed beyond what circumstances caused? And what do you think he meant by circumstances caused?
Well, let me first say that I'm not surprised because that has been the tone of his narrative from the podium that is this press conference in the morning that he does daily. And from where he has been attacking the press when he's critical about his policies. So it's not the first outrageous statement from President López Obrador. He has also called them sicarios of the pen. He has called us the equivalent of the enemy of the people, as Donald Trump did in the previous campaign against the press in the U.S. And I don't know. I think he's living in a different reality, an alternate reality, because he also talks about public safety as an issue that he was able to achieve great results, and the reality shows the contrary. And it's insulting for the press because we have seen that even in these dire conditions, many reporters in Mexico, men and women, have been doing great job all along the country. There are some areas where you can call it news deserts or areas of silence, but still many of them manage to put out information relevant to the public in very dangerous conditions. So it's very insulting for the press, those statements from the president.
Okay, so but what do you think he meant by circumstances caused? I mean, he has to admit that there have been journalists killed during his 6-year term.
Well, I don't know exactly what he was thinking, but it's difficult because it doesn't make any sense in many of his statements in general. But I'm probably I think that he was probably trying to compare to 1994 when we have several high-profile political killings. The assassination of the presidential candidate, Luis Donaldo Colosio, here in Tijuana, another leader of the PRI at those days. But for example, I mean, one of the first arguments to dispute those statements is that they tried to kill Ciro Gomez Leiva, the news presenter, the broadcaster from Radio Fórmula or from Imagen TV, who survived only because he was riding in a bulletproof car. So that was the only reason he was not killed. I understand, and I have to acknowledge that some of the people involved in the killing were arrested, but still, the only reason was not to the nice policies of the Mexico favoring freedom of the press. It's exactly because he was right, because he's a high-profile journalist, and he was writing in a bulletproof case. But he does not represent, with all my respect, he does not represent the average reporter who is doing the work or the basic ground work that is providing information, in many cases, to media outlets like the one being directed by Ciro Gomez Leiva.
Right. And obviously part of the issue of covering things in Mexico is the strength and the dangers coming from the drug cartels. Recently, there was a video of a journalist who said he received a video threat from drug cartel members, and I sent that to you, and I can put that post that in our site later for people to see as well. What was your reaction to that? You know, both to the way the journalist handled the story and to the way the threats came to him.
Those two precisions that you're making are very relevant for this particular case, and to see and have a real view of what's the situation of the Mexican press. First, the threat itself is very dangerous, and it is not unusual. It is unusual. There is directed to a very high public figure. He's very well known. He's very popular, and he besides to have his own social media platforms, he has a show in television, I think in another part of Mexico. But the way he conducts himself as a journalist is very questionable. In many cases, he has probably would be right accusing people, but he is denying the due process. He's denying all the ethical standards that you have to comply to when trying to be a reporter, a professional reporter, a professional journalist.
Right.
But this is exactly what is going on in the current landscape, because people doesn't rely on media who try to hold to themselves to the ethical standards, because they think they are being favorable to the government. This guy, I think his name is Carlos Jimenez.
Mm-hmm.
This gentleman is very blunt, so to speak. I mean, if somebody's arrested, he's accusing immediately, and he's trying the case on the public platform. And I'm assuming that in many cases he's right. He has very good sources with the police. Obviously, he's always getting surveillance tapes from the police. So you can tell exactly for the elements that you can see in his publications that he has great sources in the police. But they are happy because they see the results without going to the judges, without going to the Attorney General's office to validate the actions of the police. So this is a problem in the sense that make us all look bad, but also is risky for him. But at the same time, makes it easier for somebody who is not agreeing with what a reporter publishes to act against them. So it's a very complicated issue in this case. The guy is very popular. I guess the guy is very popular because people is fed up with the lack of efficiency of the police. Many of the criminals are committing crimes one and again and not being detained. So when they saw somebody who is showing how they were arrested, and the neighbors are fed up with these actions, they are just cheering his actions, this way of quote unquote journalism, no? So it's very dangerous, but also shows also the power of these criminal organizations, which criminal gangs.
Well, for a long time, they have been operating with impunity, and sometimes, unfortunately, with the not necessarily the support, but at least the benign neglect of governments on various levels within the country, and that's been part of the problem we've seen there for journalists. Speaking of the whole issue of the legal system in Mexico, AMLO has changed the Mexican judiciary from one where judges, even Supreme Court judges, will no longer be appointed, but will be elected. And there have been a number of organizations that have said, this is a serious problem for civil liberties and civil rights in Mexico. Do you see anything in this action that will impact on finding a way to end impunity against threats and the killings of journalists, and even on press freedom itself?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on the matter and all these changes. I'm not sure that you can find really experts by now because it's the way the fast track that they use to approve these measures, even though they will be challenged. There's a little couple of options to challenge those new reforms. But in the larger scheme, in the wide perspective, what I can understand is that this will just add more concentration of power. So the problem for freedom of the press is when you want to respond or dispute some accusations, it just make it more difficult for the accused to prove the ill intent coming from the government or from either a private entity or a powerful businessman or a drug organization using a legal front to conduct businesses, no? And so the matter is that the problem with this reform is that it increases the concentration of power, mainly in the president or in the female president will be in charge after October the 1st. Because the system will be set up in a way that you will be chosen based on the preference or the proximity to their policies, even it will be just using a lucky draw in one of the stages to be selected as a judge. That's I mean, like you put the names on a bowl and then you put your hand, choose one. That's one of the procedures that they're going to be using. I can find the English word for tombola, but tombola means at one of those places in the game shows where they just make it round and make it
in
rotate.
USA for bingo. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you put your hand in, then just pick one, and this is the one. They claim that this will be after a previous election, where will include the popular recommendation letters from your neighbors. So the whole judicial reform, it's very shaky, to say that. It's very obscure and very difficult if you are trying to assure independence from the main powers. And this is the main problem, and not just the freedom, not just freedom of the press, but all the rights of the Mexicans will be in jeopardy.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Again, we've seen bits and pieces of it coming out in the U.S. press, and there are a lot of people expressing concern. But I hope we can come back to you in the future, and we'll talk about this some more, see how it goes. And speaking of the future, just lastly, and we had talked about this before when you were on a larger session to talk about press freedom under the new administration. What do you think is going to be happening under Sheinbaum? Will she move aggressively on impunity issues, or will we just see a repeat of the AMLO administration?
That's difficult to know, but the signs are pointing to the fact that she will continue with the same policies. And she is not showing much interest in go away from what we have seen, which is very concerning. Because the level of impunity of the organized crime groups is what is still marking the environment that we are dealing with as a whole society. And as this is affecting all citizens, all professions. But obviously, we as reporters, we as somebody trying to act as watchdogs and indicate or show up or discover the illegalities of the way the government conducts themselves, put us in a higher risk and makes it more difficult. And in that sense, since I don't see anything that will point to a change on that direction, on the same policies, I'm really concerned. I hope this new president, she, even when many consider her his heiress, in the sense of she's just continuing, and she has stated, that she's will build the second level of the Cuarta Transformación, as they call it. I hope, this is just a hope, but it's almost as wishful thinking, that she will realize that things cannot go right if they continue to go like this. We have to admit that this last year we have less reporters killed, between 3 or 4, depending on the organization that you are following, and because many varies in their circumstances. But we do have other cases of reporters that have been threatened. In the case of Chiapas, last month we have another case that they broke into his house and they beat the reporter. And Chiapas, you remember that from the mid-90s, where the Zapatista revolt happened, has been seen a big increase on violence, and even Mexicans have to flee to Guatemala trying to find some safety, something unseen in the history of Mexico. But in that environment, that's when you have the case of this reporter whose house was broken and he was beating. And I hope he's doing better. He survived the attack, but he was in very bad conditions. And we have another case in a different state. So we saw that there's less reporters killed, which is good, always good. But still, we have 4 people that we are no longer with us, and we have some other cases of people being threatened. And there's another case of a reporter who decided not to go away from, stop doing journalism because he was beaten on not very clear circumstances in Michoacan. So doesn't seem very good. I hope I'm wrong. I hope she show us that she will see conditions to change, even if they have to keep the good aspects that you can find in this government, in the Cuarta Transformación or AMLO government. But things need to change. Otherwise, we're gonna be in big trouble.
Yeah, you had mentioned the continued threats against journalists. I was just looking at a list of things that happened in the past 2 weeks. Mexico City police arrested 2 journalists at a human rights protest. A Mexican journalist received threatening message in an area besieged by organized crime. Edgar Arroyo was shot in an attack in central Mexico. Humberto Paget says he's going to retire following an armed robbery. I assume that's the one you were talking about. Yeah. And a reporter's son was kidnapped. It's now been he's been found alive. But this is all just in the past 2 weeks. So
because the situation has been making more difficult the life of everybody. I mean, the case of the son of the reporter being kidnapped is in Sinaloa, where there's a feud within the Sinaloa cartel with one faction in alliance on following El Mayo Zambada son, and the other faction is El Chapo Guzman's sons. So they are fighting each other, and in between is the society, all the residents of Sinaloa or Culiacan. And again, the president was accusing the media to overblown, to be sensationalistic, and make look the case worse than it really was. People cannot go to school. Last week, they canceled classes. They canceled school activities. So they closed the schools for safety reasons. Yesterday, on Monday, they opened it again. But 90% of the people didn't send their kids to school because they don't feel safe. You can see a little bit more activity on the streets of Culiacan or some of the other areas of cities affected. But at 5 p.m., almost anybody is outside because they are afraid that you can see these convoys of armed men roaming around the city trying to find each other. And they're going house to house when they think there's a rival living there. So that's where, in this environment, is where somebody kidnapped three youngsters. Among those, one, the son of the police beat reporter in Sinaloa.
Wow. Well, Vicente, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule. You're always a joy to talk with. I mean, a lot of times, unfortunately, the news is not joyful, but it's great to get such a good perspective of what's happening in Mexico. And remember, anything that we can do within the SPJ to help, you can always call on us. So Vicente Calderón, founder and editor of Tijuana Press, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you for the interest. It's very helpful for us in general, for all the Mexican reporters. Thank you.